Lisa Feldman Barrett, APS past president, and it's my honor to introduce this presentation by Richard M. Lerner in recognition of his 2020 APS James McKeen Cattell Fellow Award. The James McKeen Cattell Fellow Award is APS's highest honor, recognizing members for a lifetime of outstanding contributions to the area of applied psychological research addressing a critical problem in society at large. Rich is the Bergstrom Chair of Applied Developmental Science and a professor at Tufts University. He studies the application of developmental science across the lifespan, developmental systems theory, personality and social development in adolescence, and programs and policies for children, youth, and families. Congratulations, Rich, on behalf of myself and the entire APS Board of Directors.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Lisa. It was a huge honor to receive the Cattell Award last year, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk about this work that I've done over the course of my career in this video. As you can see from my first slide, what I'm going to be talking about is my work on promoting positive youth development. This work involves three concepts that I'm going to be explaining: plasticity, or the potential for systematic change across the lifespan; specificity, the idea that each person has characteristics of individuality that make him or her distinct; and then a complex concept called non-ergodicity, which I'll explain again, but it's basically the idea that we don't want to use averages across groups to try to represent the specific attributes of any individual young person. And when I finish talking about these three concepts, we'll be in a position to talk about how we can use PYD scholarship to promote positive development and social justice among the youth of the world. So across my career, I've been interested in trying to understand and enhance positive youth development. Basically, this boils down to trying to discover what goes right in the lives of young people. When I started my work, we thought of adolescents as in deficit, as having a biological set of characteristics that put them in inevitable and universal storm and stress. What my work has been aimed at identifying is that all youth have strengths, and all contexts within which youth live and work and develop have resources, that if we're smart enough, we can align with young people's strengths and promote their positive youth development. How do we move from deficits to developmental strengths? We need two sets of activities. First, theory, and I'm going to talk briefly about what's called dynamic relational developmental systems theory. A lot of jargon, but I'll explain that in a moment. And we're going to emphasize three things in that brief overview of theory. That the basic aspect of human development is mutually influential relations between a specific individual and a context that also is specific. Because the context includes time, that means that there's always going to be variability or the potential for systematic change in human development, and we call that plasticity. And finally, because no two people exist at the same time and the same place across their lifespan, each person develops characteristics of specificity, making them an individual. The second thing we need to understand my work is methodology. How do we develop methods that can get at the person-specific, also called the idiographic characteristics of people? How do we measure this across time and place? And how do we avoid using group data to try to represent the individual? And why shouldn't we do that in the first place? That's going to be the key ideas of my presentation. So let's start with relational developmental systems theories. The idea in these theories is that all levels of human life, biology, physiology, psychology, social relationships, culture, the physical ecology, and even history are all interrelated. And because they're interrelated, the basic fundamental process of human development is a mutually influential relation between a person and a context. So integrated actions, the actions of a person on the context and the context on the person is the basic focus of human development. And because history or temporality is the largest, most pervasive part of the context, all people have relative plasticity. That means all people can change. What we see doesn't have to be what we get. We can find ways to enhance their life because of plasticity. However, we have to work with understanding the individuality of that plasticity, because no two people, even identical twins, are in the same place at the same time across their lifespan. What this approach to theory does is give us optimism that we can apply developmental science to promote positive development, and that is going to be our pathway to furthering social justice for kids around the world. So let me start by talking about specificity and the work of Mark Bornstein, who has been a major proponent of this relational developmental systems approach. Mark agrees that the basic process of human development are these bidirectional relations that exist in a specific way for specific kids at all time. And that means that all children develop physiological, psychological, sociocultural characteristics that, at least in part, are unique to them. To understand a child, then, we have to take what's called a holistic or a whole child approach, and to understand that the holism of each child makes them an individual because of the way they navigate their life across time and place. So the way we do research from this theoretical perspective is to ask a complex set of questions. What specific behaviors of what specific individual, in what specific place, of what specific duration, in what communities, societies, cultures, at what time in the lifespan, and at what time in history result in the specific features of that person's development. Simply then, to study development, research must begin with a focus on changes within specific people. We shouldn't look at a group, get a group average, and try to say that group can represent every individual who contributes to that group. We're in the midst, then, of a true paradigm shift, a shift in the way we think about doing research and the way we think about studying human development. If each person is an individual, we can't go to an average score and say, well, this average for 100 people substitutes for the individual scores for each of those 100 people. We need to study people as individuals and look at those changes within each person across time. This leads us to rejecting the traditional way we do research in psychology. And here we come to the work of two methodologists who are really important to understand. Peter Molinar from Penn State and John Nesserode from the University of Virginia. They explain that there are mathematical theorems called the ergodic theorems, which allow you to calculate means and standard deviations from your data. The way you get a mean or a standard deviation is you add up the scores of individuals and you divide by the number of individuals and you get that mean. The ergodic theorems work by assuming that all people in that group are apples. We don't have apples, oranges, and bananas. We only have apples, and therefore we can add all the scores, and those scores mean the same thing for every person. Moreover, that person will remain the same across time and place. And so we don't have to worry that the context will change how we have to score that person. They remain the same apple no matter what happens across their life. However, those assumptions which have allowed us to use group information to represent individuals is easy to do, but it's also completely wrong. Because from a developmental perspective, no two people stay the same in the same way across time and place. Human development, then, is non-ergodic. It's not able to rely on average scores representing individual people. We need to study individuals as individuals across time and place. And this leads then to the positive youth development perspective. because all people have the potential to change, to be better than they are, to do more than they're doing at any point in time. All youth have strengths. Plasticity is a major strength of human development. There are also resources in every context: teachers, mentors, coaches, after-school programs. These resources are termed developmental assets. They're the social nutrients that every child needs to grow up in a healthy, positive way. So where are these assets found? These assets are found wherever you find kids: in families, schools, faith institutions, youth-serving organizations, and communities in general. And so here's the key idea in the positive youth development perspective. It's the idea that's guided my career. If the strengths of young people are combined with the assets that exist in their world, positive, healthy development will occur. The positive youth development perspective is, like the relational developmental systems theory that gave birth to it, is optimistic. We should be optimistic that it's in our power to promote positive development among all youth, to create more asset-rich communities, and to put all young people on a positive pathway. With the work of my life collaborator, both in my personal life as well as in my professional life, Jackie Lerner, we have focused on the bidirectional connections between people and context to develop a theory of positive youth development. And here's what it is, and then I'll show you a graph illustrating it. PYD occurs when youth strengths are aligned across time and place with developmental assets. There are numerous strengths of youth. Here we can talk about self-regulation, hope for the future, school engagement, etc. Individuals, institutions, and programs can provide the assets needed to align with these strengths and put young people on a positive pathway. Jackie and I, as we'll illustrate in a moment, have defined positive youth development through 5 C's. As you'll see: competence, confidence, character, connection, and caring. And we've tested the idea that when youth develop those C's at a high level, a 6th C will occur: contribution. Young people will be able to contribute positively to themselves, their families, their schools, their communities, and ultimately civil society. As you see in this slide, which is an illustration of the Lerner and Lerner model, what you see is on the left side that the strengths of young people are aligned with the ecological assets that can exist in their setting. And when that occurs, PYD, defined as competence, confidence, character, connection, and caring, develop. And when those 5 C's develop at high levels, 2 things happen. Contribution to self, family, community, and civil society occurs, and risk and problem behaviors decrease. The reason that there's a question mark between the positive outcomes of PYD and the problematic ones is that not all people have a completely inverse relation between positive development and problem behaviors. Sometimes we see both in a young person, but what we see depends on specificity, on what is going on at the specific time and the specific place in their context. So what have we learned about PYD to date? Let me share with you findings from both the United States and internationally. In 2002, Jackie and I launched the 4-H study of positive youth development. 4-H, which is the largest youth-serving organization in the United States, 7 million kids a year participate in 4-H, wanted us to do a study of America's young people, not just the 4-H kids. So we studied 7,000 young people from 42 states from the 5th grade, about age 10, through the 12th grade, about age 17 or 18. What we discovered is that there are both individual and contextual components of positive youth development. First, we discovered that there are several youth strengths that both predict PYD and contribution across the grade 5 to grade 12 age range. Things like intentional self-regulation, hope for the future, school engagement, spirituality, all contribute to PYD and contribution across the grade span from 5 to 12. In addition, we discovered that there are 3 key characteristics, we call them the big 3, of youth programs that when they are combined produce positive youth development. First, are positive and sustained adult-youth relations from a coach, a mentor, a faith leader. Second, what happens in those youth-adult relationships? Skill building occurs. We teach young people how to acquire and use the life skills necessary for thriving across their lives. And third, the third big 3 component is we give young people the opportunity to use those skills in positive ways, in valued ways, in families, in schools, in communities. When we put those big 3 together, what we see is both PYD and contribution occurs across grades 5 to 12. And we see this across youth from the United States. 6 years ago, Compassion International approached Jackie and me and said, can we do what you did in the 4-H study among American youth for youth in the majority world? That is, youth in low and moderate income countries. Compassion International is a child sponsorship organization, like Christian Children's Fund or Save the Children. You pay $38 a month and you can change the life of a child that you're sponsoring. Compassion works in 25 of the poorest nations with over 2.1 million kids. They gave us the resources to start the Compassion International study of positive youth development. And currently, we're working in 2 countries. We're working in El Salvador and Rwanda. And what have we found? What we found is that, again, at the individual level, youth strengths like intentional self-regulation, hope for the future, and spirituality all predict PYD and contribution. For instance, in El Salvador, youth who are supported by Compassion International have significantly higher levels of PYD and spirituality compared to youth who are not in the Compassion International programs. In turn, in Rwanda, CI youth, that is youth involved in Compassion International programs, report significantly higher levels of contribution than non-Compassion International youth. What about the context? The CI model uses the big 3 curricular components to design their programs. They use mentoring, they use skill building, and they use youth leadership to promote positive youth development. In El Salvador, we found that different ways that those big 3 are used actually change program outcomes. And so therefore, that's an example of how the specificity principle is relevant. Use those big 3 differently, you're going to see different youth outcomes. In turn, in Rwanda, we developed a measure of the big 3, and we found that in Rwanda, youth supported by Compassion International not only had higher levels of the big 3 than did non-compassion youth, but we also found that the big 3 was related to youth strengths, like the C's, and contribution. Not only was this in Rwanda, we've also found this in El Salvador. So that gives you a sense of how we are now studying PYD around the world. And this leads me to some final comments. What we've seen is that if you change the relations between a specific child and a specific context, you can change the pathway of positive development, the strengths of that child, and their contribution to self, family, community, and civil society. Now consider the fact that so many children, not only in the United States, but around the world, are marginalized by issues of poverty, social injustice, racism, and disparities in education, in health, in employment, and even in their physical safety. What happens when we use the strengths of young people and the resources that exist in their context to change their individual context relations? we can promote not just positive youth development, but we can promote social justice and decrease the disparities in health, in education, in employment, in safety that exist in low and middle income countries and in the United States among youth of color. The PYD model gives us a lens for promoting social justice and health among all children. It has been my life work, and I hope to be able to continue my life to move with this model forward into the future. So thank you very much for your attention.